Blah the Burgundy. Welcome back, everybody. It is Sunday, August 16th, 2026, and we left off finishing up Genesis and starting Exodus 1. So that's where we pick it up. Exodus 1, verse 1. And if you want to get caught up, so we've read the whole of the New Testament and now on through Genesis, and we'll continue until we finish. And then who knows what we'll do after that. But for the next long while, we'll be finishing the Old Testament. But if you want to get caught up, the New Testament is already up on the YouTube channel, and we're going through the Old Testament. So we've just finished Genesis to this point. Okay, Exodus 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them, which we know because of Joseph, the Israelites were. It just dawned on me why they're called the Israelites, because they're all from Jacob. That's interesting. But anyway, they were all put in the land of Goshen, which the Pharaoh willingly gave to them because of Joseph. But wait a minute, that's an interesting question. I just want to ask, why is it that the main promise was made to Abraham, but the people themselves are called the Israelites, as in stemming from Jacob? Or does it hold some other meaning? I'm wondering if or why they weren't called the Abrahamites, for example. Although it sounds silly today, it would seem to make sense since the initial promise was made to Abraham and not to Jacob or Israel. The distinction actually gets at how biblical identity works. Abraham is the ancestor of the covenant, but Jacob/Israel is the ancestor of the particular people/nation that covenant produces. The key is that Abraham's descendants are a much broader category than Israel. Abraham has two major lines of descent in Genesis, Ishmael and Isaac. Isaac then has Esau and Jacob. So simply being descended from Abraham does not uniquely identify the people, who later become the 12 tribes. Ishmaelites and Abrahamic are, oh my gosh, I'm messing this up. Ishmaelites are Abrahamic descendants. Edomites, through Esau, are also Abrahamic descendants. The covenant promise, therefore, becomes progressively specified. Abraham to Isaac to Jacob/Israel, his new name. And then they, from there, are the 12 tribes of Israel born. God first gives the great covenantal promises to Abraham: land, descendants, blessing, and becoming a great nation. But Genesis itself emphasizes that the covenantal line will proceed specifically through Isaac, rather than merely through any biological descendant of Abraham. Through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Then of Isaac's two sons, the covenantal line is identified with Jacob rather than Esau. And this is where the terminology becomes especially important. Jacob receives the name Israel in Genesis 32:28. Later, God reiterates it in Genesis 35:10 through 12 and immediately connects the new name with the Abrahamic promises, nations, kings, descendants, and the land promised to Abraham and Isaac. In other words, Jacob isn't receiving an unrelated promise. He is becoming the particular heir through whom the Abrahamic covenant will take national form. And Jacob has the 12 sons. Yeah, okay. I was just curious. All right. Verse 6. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, Why have you done this, and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, whose sister? Oh, Moses' sister, who was in the river. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because she said, I drew him out of the water. One day, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, Why do you strike your companion? He answered, Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, Surely the thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, How is it that you have come home so soon today? They said, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock. He said to his daughters, Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So this is an interesting way to phrase it. Obviously, God didn't forget something in these cases. So I'm wondering what, maybe that's just a weird translation thing, but let's see. What is the intended meaning when we read God remembered something? Obviously, God isn't forgetting something since he is omniscient. So what is the true meaning of this? In passages like this, God remembered does not mean that God forgotten. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. It does not mean that God had forgotten and then recalled something. In biblical Hebrew, remember often has a stronger covenantal sense, to bring something to mind in such a way that one acts upon it. Okay, I see. The text is describing God turning toward Israel in covenant faithfulness. Remembered means something like God took account of his covenant and moved to fulfill what he had promised. It signals not a change in God's knowledge, but the beginning of decisive covenant action. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Where were we? At the end here. Exodus 3, verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord, Jesus, so here, oh wait, let me highlight this. This is the maybe the 4th or 5th, actually, theophany now. I just want to mark them as we go through the Old Testament, and not theophany, sorry, Christophany, meaning a pre-incarnate sighting of Jesus, or pre-incarnate, I guess sighting is a good enough word. Verse 3, and Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. Wait, what? Verse 2, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush, Moses, "Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" He said, "But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." Then Moses said to God, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say then?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" All right, that's pretty badass. Okay, so I want to... that's really cool. What does that mean, though? What do the theologians say about the intended meaning of God declaring himself as "I am"? And I actually heard my pastor talk about this the other day. So "I am" being present tense, meaning I am always, I am omniscient, omnipresent, many things. Exodus 3:14 is one of the most discussed statements about God in the entire Bible, and theologians have drawn enormous implications from it. But there is an important distinction between what the Hebrew phrase means in its immediate Exodus context and the larger theological conclusions later Jewish and Christian thinkers have drawn from it. The Hebrew is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I probably butchered that. Traditionally meaning "I am who I am." But Ehyeh is the first person form of the Hebrew verb "to be," and it can carry a present or future tense. Sense. Sense or tense? Whatever. Present or future sense, it says. So scholars also render it "I will be who I will be," which matters enormously. So number one, in context, God is promising, "I will be with you." Okay. Notice what happens immediately before the famous statement. Moses asked, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" God answers, "But I will be with you." The Hebrew for "I will be" is Ehyeh, the same verb God uses 2 verses later, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. So many Hebrew scholars think God's name deliberately echoes his promise to Moses. Moses, "Who am I? God, I will be with you." Moses, "Who are you? What name should I give Israel?" God, "I will be who I will be." In other words, God's answer isn't merely an abstract philosophical statement about existence. It is intimately connected with his presence and faithfulness. In other words, you will discover who I am by what I am about to do. I will be with you. I will prove myself faithful. Several Hebrew Bible scholars emphasize precisely this contextual connection between God's name, his presence, and the actions through which Israel Israel will come to know him. Number 2, but there is also something extraordinary about the sheer I am. And it's interesting that it's all caps too. You don't see that often in the Bible. Christian theologians, especially in the classical tradition, saw something deeper here. God doesn't identify himself by reference to something greater than himself. He doesn't say, I am the strongest God. He doesn't say, I am the God of the mountains. He doesn't say, I am the God who derives his authority from X. Instead, simply, I am. This became foundational to the classical doctrine of God's aseity, meaning God exists from himself, because he's the beginning of all things, and all things are unto him. Everything else possesses existence. God does not receive existence from anything. You and I, me and you, can say, I am, but our existence is contingent. There was a time when neither of us in the audience existed. We depend upon causes outside ourselves for our continued existence, but God does not. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. We don't have to read all of that, but yeah, that's. Oh, whoops, it sent me back one. Okay, verse 15. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now, please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give you this people, And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry, and for clothing, you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. Exodus 4. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. That they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Leprous. Oh, like he had leprosy all of a sudden. Then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. If they will not believe even those two signs, or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. And the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. But Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. So I guess Moses had a speech impediment. Then the Lord said to him, Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. But he said, Oh, my Lord, please send someone else. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth. And you shall be as God to him, and you shall be as God to him. That's interesting. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs. That's really interesting. All right, so I got a question here. So I have two questions about this passage. Tell me what the theologians say. First, what is the insight around Moses changing God's mind? It's interesting that he was able to change God's mind, at least that's how the story reads, in the sense that he was not willing to take on the task completely himself, and so God was willing to accept Aaron into his plan. And then the second question is, what does it mean that Moses would be as God to Aaron? I always find these instances really intriguing because obviously God already knew what he was going to do. So it's not like he changed his mind. I just don't have a better way to articulate it. Yes, this is a fascinating passage because Exodus 4:14 through 16 touches two substantial theological themes at once. God's apparent willingness to modify how his purposes are carried out, and Moses' extraordinary role as the mediator of divine revelation. So I guess that answers that. One distinction is important at the outset, though. In Exodus 4, Moses does not persuade God to abandon the mission or choose a different outcome. God remains determined that Moses will go. What changes is the arrangement by which Moses will carry out the mission. So first, did Moses actually change God's mind about Aaron? No. There are several major ways theologians have understood this. The immediate context is striking. God has already answered 4 objections from Moses. Finally, Moses essentially says, please send someone else. At that point, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. But God, nevertheless, says, in effect, Aaron can speak for you. So there really is a divine concession in the narrative. Calvin? Oh, the commentator. Okay. Calvin, interestingly, takes that language quite seriously. He says Aaron's involvement was, in one sense, extorted from God by the importunity? I don't know that word. By the importunity of Moses, while what does that mean? Is there a lookup option here? Oh, great. Lookup. Importunity. Wait, importunity? Not importunity. Importunity. That's weird to say. Okay, persistence, especially to the point of annoyance. Oh, I see. Importunity. Weird. Persistence, especially to the point of annoyance. All right. That's funny. Just thinking. Okay, while simultaneously insisting that it was encompassed within God's eternal providence, that gives you a classic Christian distinction. At the level of God's eternal purpose, Moses has not surprised God, or supplied information God didn't possess. At the level of God's real relationship with Moses in history, Moses' resistance actually matters. So he's showing consideration. So I think that's probably the most insightful thing that I can glean from it, because obviously God knew what was going to happen already, but it proves that God is considerate even to a single human being, which is gracious. God responds to him, accommodates him, and alters the way the commission will operate. Many classic theologians, therefore, wouldn't quite say Moses changed God's mind in the sense that God originally thought that A was best, but Moses convinced him that B was better. Right, that's not what happened. And God revised his judgment. That would conflict with classical doctrines of divine omniscience and immutability. Instead, they would say something more like God ordained a genuinely interactive relationship in which Moses pleading his objections and choices are themselves means through which God's purpose unfolds. Yeah, okay. Okay, what's the second part? Number 2, you shall be as God to him. So this does not mean Moses becomes divine, nor that Aaron should worship Moses. It's describing a structure of revelation and authority. I see, so that he's saying Moses will pass along God's message. Okay, I see what it's saying. Okay. All right, let's go back. That was... Whoops. Exodus 4:16. All right, verse 17. And take in your hand this staff, which you shall do the signs. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. And the Lord said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead. So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey, and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I have put in your power. But I will harden his heart, so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son, and I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Wait, what? At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it and said, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. So he let him alone. It was then that she said, a bridegroom of blood, because of the circumcision. What in the world? Okay, I'm totally lost. What happened? He's talking to him, and then suddenly, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Okay, let's ask about this, because I'm a little lost. What is happening in this exchange I follow that God was instructing Moses, but then suddenly it shifts. And what is it talking about when it says sought to put him to death? Who is it referring to, and why? Yes, this is one of the strangest and most abrupt passages in Exodus. The shift feels sudden even in Hebrew, and there is a genuine ambiguity in the pronouns. Although the most common interpretation is that God is seeking to kill Moses. Here's what's happening. The context makes the episode especially significant. Immediately before this, God tells Moses what to say to Pharaoh. He says, Israel is God's firstborn son. If Pharaoh refuses to release God's son, God will kill Pharaoh's firstborn son. Then, without much transition, it says, in the very next verse, rather, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. The natural reading is that the him is Moses. In other words, Moses has finally obeyed God's command to return to Egypt. And while traveling there, God confronts Moses and threatens his life. That sounds bizarre until you notice what Zipporah does next. So why would God seek to kill Moses? Oh, because maybe it was like the 8th day was almost over and he commanded that they circumcise their young on the 8th day, maybe. We'll see. So why would God seek to kill Moses? Zipporah immediately circumcises their son. That tells us what the crisis concerns. Circumcision was the covenant sign God had given Abraham. Every male among you shall be circumcised. Any uncircumcised male shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Apparently, one of Moses' sons had not been circumcised. Exodus doesn't tell us why. Perhaps Moses had neglected it. Perhaps Zipporah, who was Midianite rather than Israelite, had resisted it. We simply aren't told, but the irony is enormous. Moses is being commissioned as God's covenant representative while his own household is violating the sign of that covenant. Okay. And God is about to send Moses to Pharaoh with a message concerning obedience, covenant identity, and firstborn sons. So before Moses can confront Pharaoh, God confronts Moses. Then Zipporah saves him. The sequence is the Lord confronts Moses and seeks to kill him. Zipporah apparently recognizes what is wrong. She circumcises their son with a flint knife. She touches Moses' feet with the foreskin. The Lord releases him. Oh, snap. Okay. I see. So his wife saved his life. Okay. That is why verse 26 says, so he let him alone. The circumcision resolves whatever had provoked God's judgment. Feet is interesting because Hebrew regel, which normally means feet or legs, but it can sometimes function as a euphemism involving the genital area. Scholars disagree about exactly what Zipporah physically did here. The important narrative point is clear. The blood of circumcision averts the threatened death. So bridegroom of blood is the hardest part in the interpretation. Zipporah says, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. We don't know precisely what she means by that expression. It may reflect her horror or anger at having to circumcise her son. Or it may describe Moses as someone whose life has just been preserved through the blood of circumcision. The narrator then explicitly connects her expression with circumcision. She says, it was then that she said, a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. So the blood is covenant blood, and somehow that blood causes God to relent. There is one important ambiguity. Some interpreters think God was seeking to kill Moses' son rather than Moses. Okay, so that's up in the air. Hebrew uses pronouns without explicitly naming the person in verse 24. So grammatically, the identity isn't absolutely explicit. That interpretation also makes some sense because the preceding verse has just mentioned the death of Pharaoh's firstborn son. However, Moses is generally considered the likelier referent, especially because Zipporah's action toward Moses appears to cause the Lord to let him alone. Okay. So, but if nothing else, we know that it was because the covenant had not been fulfilled. He had not circumcised his son. Yikes. Okay. All right. Where was I? Here. I was here. Verse 24. Or no, sorry. Verse 27. The Lord said to Aaron, it's messing up. Hold on one second. Let me reopen it. Verse 27. The Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which he had sent him to speak, and all the signs that he had commanded him to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshipped. All right, so that's the end of Exodus 4. I think that's a good stopping point for tonight. So we'll pick it up tomorrow on Exodus 5, verse 1. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to drop a sub, share it with a friend. God bless you guys, and good night.